Thank you for that introduction. And this is the last of your day talking about child sexual abuse. It's a tough topic. And I know that when I speak to any audience, I'm speaking to people who have experienced this or who have known loved ones who have experienced this. So I encourage you all to take care of yourselves, whatever impact this day has had on you. As workers, many of us working in this field can make an amazing difference, but we need to take care of ourselves. So my part in this is to talk about the coordinated response to survivors, to child survivors and to their families, to the non-offending caregivers, and how would they heal. So we're going to talk about some of the things that I heard Dr. Sims say. I will reiterate maybe from my perspective, which is the perspective of an advocate and a therapist, which would be a little bit different, but hopefully validating that the multidisciplinary teamwork is really going to be the most important thing we can do for these children who have been harmed and for their families that have been torn apart or devastated by child sexual abuse. I'm going to talk some about how we help them heal and some of my experience with clients over the years. We're going to talk about co-occurring domestic and sexual violence, which is often happening, and it's really a problematic dynamic when you have sexual assault and domestic violence in the home. And I'm not advancing, this is my, right? So we're going to talk about the co-occurring domestic and sexual violence. I think that's really difficult, and in the child sexual assault world, understanding those dynamics is critical to the healing of the child particularly, but also to the family. Adult survivors who are non-offending parents of child survivors, so we'll talk more about that. The intergenerational trauma that we see, and I know a lot of you see that. I looked on the participant list here. I know a lot of you have seen a lot of things. So we can be together in that. And when Dr. Sims was saying, "Can you believe that one?" I was saying, "Yeah, I can. Can you?" Yeah, I mean, you've pretty much heard it all, unless you're brand new in the field. And if you are brand new in the field, you really do need to take care of yourself too, from hearing some of the things that have been presented and some of the things you have seen and will see and hear. I'm also going to touch on sex trafficking of children a little bit. If we have enough time, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but mostly I'm not an expert in that, but I can tell you we are dealing with it, and I'm dealing with it in my program, which is a comprehensive sexual assault program, including a child advocacy center in Calhoun County. So we're going to look now, we're going to see a video through our eyes, children, violence, and trauma. What I want you to pay attention to when you're looking at this video, I think it has a huge impact. It shows the impact of trauma, violent trauma, on children. But I want you to also keep in mind that most of the parents that we're going to be working with and that we do work with, many of them, I don't know the percentage, but a majority of them have also experienced that pattern of trauma in their own lives when they were children. And so these are the people who are parenting the children we're going to be seeing now. And so if we can have some understanding maybe of where they're coming from, that might help us help them all.
My mother and my brother were murdered in front of me. He put the gun to my head and he had me beg for my life. I was 10. I just turned 10.
It's hard to come out and say that I was a victim and that I was abused, especially when you're little, because it's like a big secret that's always on your back and that you never know when it's going to come out.
The image of my brother falling on that concrete floor and people stepping and just kicking with shoes on his face. I couldn't get that image out of my head.
Trauma is an overwhelming event. It takes away our safety, it creates a sense of helplessness, and it continues to affect our perception of our reality.
Some of the telltale signs of trauma are quite evident. Many of these symptoms, it's not that we don't see them, it's that we don't put together the entire sort of picture of what trauma is. Inability to sleep or interrupted sleep, inability to focus on what's going on, really not able to attend to learning. Adults need to be aware of children who are exposed to violence and intervene early and stop it.
I don't like the environment that I stay in. People getting killed every day, drug deals, people getting snatched, raped, cut up.
Whether it is a child who witnesses violence or a child who is the victim, you can't be fearful and be able to live your normal life. You have to be able to think clearly, and when you're traumatized, you can't do that.
Violence continues then to affect a child in their perception of their community, of their family. The danger is right around the corner. And the brain gets wired to expect danger.
My dad started actually physically beating me to the point to where I'd go to school covered in bruises. I don't know how many times I've been threatened to be killed by my own dad.
My brother got shot in the head. He ain't make it.
It makes you afraid at times. It makes you feel that, oh my God, you know what, I just lost a friend, I just lost a family member. It just makes you feel that, hey, I could die next, I could be the next one dead.
What trauma does is it triggers what's called the amygdala in the brain, which is our fight, flight, freeze center.
And it truly is a change in the brain and a change in the stress hormones that are flowing through the body.
All our brains have what we call alarm systems. Because the brain now has been wired for danger and it's triggered into this fight-flight, we don't just get over a traumatic event. It continues to impact us.
I started hearing my mom scream in the middle of the night. And it got to the point where he started beating me and my sisters. I let my anger build up, didn't talk to anybody about it.
When you hold everything aside, it's like a bomb and it's like you're ready to explode and just somebody push that last button.
Most kids who've experienced violence oftentimes have experienced multiple types of violence. In the kids we see, the average number of different types of violent trauma is 4. And so complex trauma then affects multiple areas of the brain because it's ongoing.
Maybe it's gang warfare, maybe it's drug use and abuse in the family, maybe it's domestic violence, maybe it's bullying at school. And if there is a layering effect of cumulative violence, it changes literally the DNA.
It all started off with the hugging game. He would take us into his room. We would sit on his lap and he would hug us, and we weren't supposed to tell anyone.
When I was 5, I would have to leave kindergarten class and go home and have sex with this man who was in his 50s. I remember the long walk home and crying and falling down and having to get back up and walking on.
Child sexual abuse exists in the neighborhood, exists unfortunately at our schools, at our churches, at our homes, everywhere. And there are children out there suffering.
My first assault was in high school. I met a guy at the church and he wanted to be my friend. I thought it'd be great. And instead he assaulted me and I felt very scared.
When you have a child that doesn't get to work through that abuse in an appropriate manner, that abuse doesn't go away. It lives in that child.
Exposure to violence in childhood has been found to be associated with a really unbelievable range of long-term impacts.
Very young children who are exposed to violence many times have difficulty in establishing a trusting relationship. These children have fears.
You're twice as likely to develop depression. You're probably 3 times as likely to develop some type of anxiety disorder.
As they move into school age, they may have very, very serious behavior problems. As we look at adolescence, we see children running away. Sometimes children may be involved in the juvenile justice system, which puts the child at risk for being an adult offender. And so the cost of violence is staggering.
I felt isolated. Nobody knew what I was going through. To go 3 years without talking about it, I imploded.
Finally, after stressing and keeping everything bottled up and everything building up, I just finally broke down one day and attempted suicide.
Suicide is the 3rd leading cause of death of children and adolescents in this country. We always ask in every case, what role might child abuse have played?
My mother, she knew that stuff was going on, but it just seemed like she didn't really care. She never stopped that abuse. And to this day, I've never forgotten what some of my family members have done to me.
These are traumatized kids, and so how do we then, as adults, professionals, caregivers, put a system around children that really is trauma-informed?
Happy feeling, good job, okay?
What do we do differently to help rewire their brain? And then ultimately, how do we build capacity in order to really help our kids?
Everybody come together, whether it's in the community, in the home, in the school, wherever children are, and child by child, think of ways in which we can intervene early and educate people about what children need in order to grow, to thrive, and to continue to be resilient human beings.
So I know we have a big room in here, but does anybody have any comment or reaction that you might want to make to that, or anything that stood out? Sometimes people have a couple of words after seeing it. Okay. If you want to say something later, we can. So I know that some of the other speakers, and I heard Dr. Sims speak about identifying victimization of child sexual assault. And here's where there's a big problem. It's really hard to tell, right? And even when we know it's happened, medical exams don't prove it most of the time. So it's very difficult to tell. Just being a child is the biggest factor for risk of sexual assault. The vulnerability, so it's the vulnerability of children. Factors that increase the child's vulnerability then are their family circumstances, the accessibility, and the proximity to the offender. We just saw the stat in that film, and I know you've heard it earlier, that at least 90% of victims of child sexual abuse, child victims, know their offender well. And I think it bumps up to 96% if we're talking about people that peripherally know. Those are the rare cases we hear in the news about the stranger abductions, rape of a child, and usually those end in homicide. Those are the exceptions, yet those are the ones that are all over the news, and we're preaching stranger danger in the schools sometimes when that is really not an effective strategy for protecting most of our children. The accessibility and proximity, so we're talking about family members, neighbors, babysitters, clergy, coaches, Girl Scout, Boy Scout, Scout leaders, any people who we entrust children to. Either we're raising them in our homes, or we're entrusting other adults in our community to provide meaningful activity that's good activity to enrich their lives. This is where the predators are. And the children are accessible. If a child in one of those groups happens to be particularly needy for attention, for whatever reason, they're lonely, they're isolated, they become their risk and their level of vulnerability rises even more. So you know what I'm talking about, right? Those kids that are going home maybe after school by themselves. Their parent has everything planned out appropriately for them. There's nothing that should be a red flag. Everything's going okay. But there are people targeting children like that, looking for those that are looking for someone to talk to, someone to play with, some activity. And we've seen them. I mean, in my organization, over the years, I have seen mostly men, but a few women who have been the kind of after-school place for all the kids to go, and then they provide them with video games and great food and alcohol, sometimes marijuana, different things. They're the cool people. They have all the toys the kids like, and they then become predators to those children. How many people have had those kinds of, seen those cases? They usually have multiple victims. We've had a number of them in my time in Calhoun County. And some have been women too. Well, it's not just mostly male. Mostly male on male and female on male victims as well. Sometimes when the parent or caregiver is vulnerable, that makes their child vulnerable. So you have parents who are struggling. They're struggling because they're single parents maybe. They're struggling because they are working multiple jobs, and they are often needing to use support of other people in their lives, like those scout leaders or coaches or neighbors or people who befriend them and support them. They need that support, and yet that again, it puts that child at higher risk. And when I'm saying these things, I'm not blaming these parents who are vulnerable or the children who are vulnerable. I hope you hear that. It's just that they happen to have that higher risk factor. And parents do need that support. And when they look to it because someone offers and it seems seemingly kind and helpful to them, it's really a terrible betrayal when they turn out to be the perpetrator. Disabilities of children or a disability of a caregiver. We had a case recently where both the child and the parent have significant cognitive disabilities, and their risk for this kind of predatory behavior is really high. And so there needs to be a better system response from our system and multidisciplinary team to how can we help this family be successful and keep the child safe. So indicators, I know you probably heard that before. There are a lot of indicators for sexual assault, and they can include physical signs and symptoms, injuries or irritation of genitals. You just heard a very detailed explanation about what that might look like or be, and oftentimes we're not seeing a lot of that, and oftentimes those injuries and irritations and things like that can be explained otherwise. Headaches, stomach aches. So children who seem to have, teachers often speak of recognizing this, and we hear this in parents too, that children don't seem to be themselves. They seem to be having a lot of stomach aches or headaches, or this would mark a change in their behavior from they used to be not symptomatic in that way, and all of a sudden we'll hear that, gosh, about a particular time I noticed that they started having a lot of stomach aches, or they didn't want to go to school, or they didn't feel well. So those can be signs. Emotional signs and symptoms, again, fears and nightmares. Children who have been abused often complain of these types of symptoms. They're post-trauma symptoms. Acting out, so they'll be, and we'll hear parents say, or teachers, this child, I never had any trouble with this child. All of a sudden, they are acting out. They're not paying attention. They're not in their seat. They won't, they're angry. They're hitting other children. They're combative. Things like that. Or they're causing, they're being sent to the office. So a change in that kind of behavior. Resistance to certain people. That makes sense, right? If somebody's doing something that they don't like, they don't want to go. They don't like the babysitter. I heard a question about going to visit the parent from over here somewhere for Dr. Sims. And that's a common one, and that's a really distressing one. I'll touch on it a little bit more later about custody. Parents, we have a really difficult time with watching parents fight out their custody battles and feeling like the children are used as instruments in their fight. And that really angers of those of us in the system. We don't like that. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if a child doesn't want to go with go to their sports team again, and they're complaining about the coach, or they don't like their scout, or they don't like the youth group at church, or they don't want to go over to grandma and grandpa's, it's a good idea to be aware of that and just pay attention to what's going on, what's the change. Or did they never like to go there? And another possible indicator is acting out of sexual acts not typical for children. So we heard that from Dr. Sims as well. When children are doing explicit sexual acts that are not curiosity, like the normal things, red flags go up, and that's an indicator that something's going on that we're not too happy about. The likely indicators, so what did she say? She just said a few minutes ago, there's only a couple of things that are for sure, and that is if there's a sexually transmitted infection, or if somebody has a video or a picture of it, or if somebody witnessed it happening, that we know for sure. Really, we hardly ever know for sure. Although the picture thing is happening a lot more, and that is getting, I would say in the criminal justice system, we're seeing a lot more convictions because people really do seem to enjoy capturing that on video or sending texts or doing things like that. Disclosure by the victim is a very important one to remember. And so the likelihood of sexual assault happening when a child discloses, there is a likelihood that something happened. We don't know exactly what happened, but that is something we have to investigate, and you all know that. We cannot allow that to be dismissed as anything that shouldn't be any more than a sexually transmitted infection or eyewitness to abuse or a picture of abuse. If a child says something happened, we need to pay attention to that. So when we have the possible indicators, it really takes, and the indicators, it takes a really important team assessment. What's really going on here? What is happening? What could be the reasons? There might be reasons other than sexual abuse, and I believe Dr. Sims mentioned those, but we see that a lot. And at our Children's Advocacy Center, when we're doing the interviews of kids, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at why else might this child be acting out in that very explicit way. Why else might that child have made that disclosure? Could it have been the child was mistaken? Could it have been someone coached them to say something? We aren't sure, but we must act on trying to find out. There could be other reasons: stomach aches, headaches, signs and symptoms, the physical ones, even like the injuries or irritation of genitals. Those could all be, other things. Hygiene, Maybe a child has other anxiety in their life. There's other things going on. It's not necessarily sexual assault. You put it all together, you might be worried about that, but if a child hasn't said there was, has not disclosed, and they're having stomach aches and headaches, I would not jump to say that child's been sexually abused. Any thoughts on that? Stomach aches and headaches, maybe mom and dad are having fights, maybe there's been a recent divorce, maybe there's been a recent death in the family, maybe they're having trouble in school, maybe someone's picking on them, maybe they're not doing well with their grades. There's a lot of reasons a child might have those symptoms of anxiety and distress and even depression, and we wouldn't jump to sexual assault. They might have the knowledge of and language about, like really explicit language, and acting out those explicit sexual behaviors because they've been exposed to pornography. And this is something that's changed in the 20 years I've been doing this work. You know, back when I first started, people couldn't pick up their phone and type in something and have an explicit image come up on their screen or on the computer at home. And now, I think many children are exposed in their homes when they're very small because their parents are using pornography in the home and on their phones and on their computers. And then their peers, when they get a little bit older, I think children are exploring, and younger. So we used to assume that if there was a very explicit act that two children were engaging in, maybe they saw their parents or maybe they saw adults doing that act in their home. Maybe that would be one. More likely, we thought there was a good possibility of abuse. Now, it's a really good possibility they're looking at a lot of explicit images. But we can't rule out that both are not happening, that they're viewing, because we know that the offenders are also using pornography, and they always have. They're really using it a lot as a tool to engage children in activities that they want them to. So just a little bit about sexual assault, child sexual abuse, why it's different from some other traumas that children or adults might experience. Typically, child sexual abuse is ongoing. We do have those cases, again, I would say they're more rare, where a child is abused once and they immediately go and tell someone and it's stopped and a person is held accountable and it's over. Anybody have any of those happening once in a while? Is that really the rule, though? That's the exception again. What's much more common is that it's an ongoing experience for children. It goes on for a long period of time, and we're going to talk about disclosure and why children may or may not disclose. But it happens within a relationship. And it takes a lot for a child to tell. It may not be coupled with pain. I think Dr. Sims did a great job of talking about that too. When we're talking about children in a family or in a community that's close, family, friend, or something like that, if you hurt your victim, if they are physically injured, or if you terrorize them, and they cry and scream and cry out, the chances of being able to continue that abuse relationship go down. So offenders are very good at making sure they don't physically injure or harm the child so that they can continue to perpetrate the abuse. We do hear about those cases that are the sadistic ones. I don't know if Tom talked about them today. And they're a different animal. That's a whole different thing. And but those are the more rare ones. And what we see more often are the ones who win the child over, bribe them, trick them, coerce them. And so the child is confused, very confused most of the time. Even when the child knows it's wrong and they're not supposed to. So it's ongoing. And there are some threats. I would say there are always threats, even if they're implicit. I'll talk about that a little bit more. Secrecy. Will anyone believe me? Because who else knows what happened except for the child and the offender? Who else is there to validate that it happened? And then we have those cases where we have videos that do validate the child. We have pictures. We have maybe an eyewitness. It's a rare thing, but that eyewitness validates the child. Most often there is no external validation for that child. And it also, the confusion I talked about with the child, it involves deception and betrayal of trust. And kids are just learning that. They're developing in their ability to, who do we trust? How do we build relationships? How do we operate in the world? And they have this person in their life who is disrupting and changing the course of normal development when they're abusing a child, because the child does not understand how to begin to trust someone in a normal way. So I want to ask everybody at your tables to come up with a short list. 3 reasons why. We'll get the flip chart. 3 reasons why children might not tell. A child or an adolescent. So maybe, pick one for a little kid, pick one for a teen. Okay, over here we have fear of reprisal.
No, fear, reprisal, and non-belief.
Fear, reprisal, and non-belief. Yep. What else? Who's got a different one? Yes.
I picked 2, embarrassment and because of the grooming. They might not even understand that is wrong. Can you repeat that so we hear it?
Okay, so embarrassment, and then you said grooming.
Because of the grooming, they may not even realize it's happened to them is wrong.
Okay, I'm going to put may not know.
Sorry.
Is wrong. And that would be more typical for what age group? The youngest. And embarrassment, a little bit older, although I'm going to tell you, you can see shame. When we work with little kids, I don't know. I think 5-year-olds have a lot of shame around this sometimes during their forensic interview. So, and in counseling when I've worked with them. Okay, what else? Who's got some other ones? Destroying the family. Who else had one? Somebody.
If they thought they were in a relationship.
Relationship with the offender.
Like a sexual relationship or a love.
Loss of relationship with offender. Yeah, and you would think that's mostly what? Adolescence? I'm going to tell you about, we had a kid a number of years ago who was so groomed by her offender. She was an elementary age child, and she believed that she was going to marry him. He talked to that, and they had a suicide pact and all kinds of stuff. I mean, and I'm talking an elementary age kid. That guy's in prison now. But you think some of these things will be for the very young or the adolescent, but there's a lot of crossover that's kind of surprising. Yes?
I've had children say when they disclose that
Right, so threats of violence. Threats of violence for the victim, family, and I'm going to say even pets. Okay, because sometimes they say that. Yes?
A couple of us said that older children will continue the abuse because they want to protect the younger ones.
Mm-hmm.
They would rather take it than have them be in jeopardy.
Protect younger siblings or family. Yep. We've heard it a lot. You hear that one a lot, and it's really sad because oftentimes one of those victims in a family will believe that they are the only one in the family who is enduring that abuse, and later to find out he's been abusing all of them, but they're all bound to secret. And so we've worked with a number of sibling groups like that, and it's very healing for them to get together. It's been a powerful thing to get those siblings together and have them ask each other questions. And was it, what is there something you wanted to know? That's really has been an amazing thing. And they'll say, well, why didn't you tell, or why didn't why I didn't think he would do that to you, and there's a lot of real healing in that, but it's very sad also. I think there was one over here, and then I'll come. Was there one?
It was me.
Yes.
I think it's the family dynamics as well. Maybe it's I gotta explain that more. The family is not, they don't hold positive communication, and so if that's a norm, then even something this extreme, why would they come out and say anything? Or parents are emotionally
family
I'm sorry, that's really wrong.
not emotionally available. Okay. Over here.
I had a client that came from a well-to-do family, and the abuser or perpetrator was a prominent individual in the community, and so she didn't report until much later, and then she had all these issues afterwards.
Family reputation?
Yeah.
Okay. She felt responsible for the family reputation. Right, right.
What if the perpetrator holds a high status of power in the community?
It makes it difficult. Yes.
Guilt or self-blame?
Yes. Guilt, self-blame. Even young children, because of the nature of the grooming and the coercion that happens, they feel like they're complicit in the abuse. They feel like it's a mutual. The offender is really good at getting them to believe that they have a part in it. They agreed to it. They took the bribe or took the trick, or they played the game, or whatever. And so children often will feel very guilty, like they did something wrong. And often the offender will tell them, you know what, if you tell about this, we're both going to be in trouble. I'm going to be in trouble, and you're going to be in big trouble. Mm-hmm.
And often the children don't trust authority.
Okay, so don't trust authority or the system. Is that system? Should I say system? Right, so yes. Right, so we have a lot of, yes, we'll have families who have multiple stressors in their lives. So you all, if you're DHS workers, and you know that families are in trouble for other things. Maybe there's some neglect issues, maybe they've been called out for some other issues to the home, and so the children are afraid that if authorities are called, that the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to take me away, because their parents say we can't call them, they're going to take us away. They'll take you away from me. So children fear the system as well. True.
Bribery.
So we could probably go on and do more pages, but I don't think we need to, because I think what we have demonstrated here is that there are so many reasons why kids don't tell. And they're very individual to each child and to each to each situation and the family. A couple of big ones up here. They fear, when we talk about the fear of the family falling apart, one of the biggest fears kids have is the fear that they won't be believed, and also they don't want to see their mom cry. They worry about their mother. They worry about the family falling apart. So let's just talk about disclosures for a minute. And there's a lot of words on these slides. I'll pick out a few. These are more for you to read than for me. I'm done with that one right now, yeah. I will use it a little later, though. So you probably don't want to take it away yet. I'm going to use it one more time. So an accidental disclosure, that is when a little child, typically it's a little child, the one that doesn't know that it's wrong, just blurts out, somebody touched their pee-pee or somebody did something, and then, whoa, there's a big reaction, and everybody's called, and they get to the bottom of that. So that's an accidental disclosure, when very small children really don't understand that anything wrong is happening. They just think whatever the perpetrators told them, this is a special game we play, or this is how Daddy takes care of you, this is how someone loves you, something like that. The fear of more or continued abuse. So sometimes abuse will stop for a while, and then could be a circumstance where the child might fear that it's going to begin again, and they will tell. We had a case a number of years ago with two sisters who were abused by their mother's boyfriend. Mom broke up with him, and he moved away. Well, moved out of the house. I think he was still in the area. The sisters made a pact that they weren't going to tell, and they were safe and they were good. They were fine. Mom started dating again a year later. One sister broke the pact and told, because she was really afraid if Mom had another boyfriend, they were going to be abused again. The other sister was really angry that she broke the pact. But those kids testified, did very well, and their offender went to jail. But that was a long time after. And what triggered those kids to tell a couple of years later was not that it was happening now. They were okay. He moved away. It was all over. They were going on their merry way. But it triggered them when Mom maybe would have a potential offender come near them again. Worry about the self, body, pregnancy, disease, even very little children. Again, it seems like an adolescent. The adolescents worry about being pregnant, STIs. They know about those things. But even little girls sometimes will tell us, they've told us, I'm pregnant. And why do you think that? And they have all kinds of things in their minds about what they don't have the right education. They're too young to have had education on those things, and they worry about things like that. So that's some of the stomach aches, headaches, they're worrying. That could be one reason. They share a secret with a friend. They play the dare game. I dare it, sometimes we've had kids do that. They go to camp or something, and they tell a secret, and they didn't know it was going to start the whole process of what we go through when a kid tells a secret. But sometimes they just innocently share a secret, or sometimes they don't want to hold the secret in anymore, so they tell a friend. A school presentation, so mostly we have people that go into the schools. I know our organization goes in and talks about safe and unsafe touching and what you should do and all that kind of stuff. And every year we have a good number of kids that decide that this is their time to tell, even though they have heard those presentations probably every year since they were in kindergarten. And whatever makes them decide to tell at that particular time, they do. Just because we send those people into the schools does not give, kids have the information, they know. Once they've had that, they know this is not okay, it's not supposed to be happening. This is what you do if it's happening. Here's who you should tell. This is what you can do about it. There's people to help you. And most of them still don't tell, even though they have all that, because of these reasons right here. Building internal pressure. I can't tell you how many. I think one of the kids on the video said that. A couple of them said it. I can't tell you how many kids I've had in counseling, and we've heard some in the forensic interviews say, because we try not to ask the why questions in the forensic interview, but we sort of want to know, without blaming them, you know, what made it okay for you to tell now? And sometimes they say, I just couldn't keep it in anymore. That is a very common one, and I've heard it in counseling quite frequently. I couldn't hold it in anymore. They go to bed, they're thinking about it. Those are those nightmares and the recurring thoughts and all those kinds of things. And some of them just want the abuse to stop. Some of them have it up to here. We've heard some children who the abuse is usually a progressive kind of a thing. So it starts out with touching and various things, and a lot of times in that grooming process, as the child becomes more accommodating and the offender continues to up the ante to do whatever it is they can do. They will, sometimes a child just on their own will have a point at which they say, that's it, I'm done, I'm telling. Let's see. So this disclosure is a process, so we say that a lot, and when we're talking with parents in counseling or in our forensic interview process, you know, children will often tell this much to get it out, to stop it, to kind of, you know, begin a process of maybe they can change something that's going on. And oftentimes there's much more that's happened. You know, again, once in a while we have a kid that one thing happens, they tell right away and that's it. More often they tell for one of these reasons that I just described, they disclose, and then as the time goes on, a little more comes out. Sometimes you can see that process, you see it in the short period of time, even from the time they first disclose to the forensic interview. More will come out in the interview. Sometimes more will come out in the court when they're being questioned by attorneys in the criminal justice system. They'll amend the charges, we'll add a couple more because the kids will continue to feel comfortable and be able to talk. So all kinds of factors will, you know, affect what the child decides to say. And the process is that the offender elicits that cooperation and relationship with the child. It happens within the relationship. It does, after telling children and teens, well, you know, unfortunately, a lot of them, all these fears that we just listed here, will start to happen, will start to come true. Their families will fall apart. Their mothers will cry. People in their families will be unhappy with them. It doesn't just get better for most of them right away. And so sometimes they look around at the chaos that's happening and they decide that maybe they were wrong about that. And they recant, or they deny it happened, or they say it was a misunderstanding or something like that. We cannot assume that the denial or recantation means it didn't happen. But it's a pretty frequent and common thing that kids take it back because of the way the system responds and what happens to them and the fears that they have. Experts agree that a majority of child sexual abuse victims do not tell when they are children. They don't tell in childhood. They wait till they're adults. And 2 years is the average length of time it takes a child to decide to tell. Now, we're not talking about the accidental disclosures, but when a child thinks about telling, when it happens and they know they should tell, the average is 2 years. School-age children will usually tell a caregiver. Adolescents, no way. They usually do not tell their mom. They usually tell their friend who tells their mom. And that mom calls, and that's how those get reported a lot of time. So we're when we're talking about working with parents, parents get really, you'll hear it a lot, and I know you have heard it a lot. Why didn't she tell me? This has been going on for 3 years. I told her about this. She's had it in school. She knows all about it. Why didn't she tell me? And we have to really work hard to help parents understand that children have all these reasons why they don't tell. And oftentimes they're really embarrassed to tell their mom, or they're afraid. They're afraid they won't be believed. And so the best thing that mom can do, of course, is believe them, or anyone that they tell. So, common reactions of parents. So this is a tough one because what we want to believe, so I want you to all think about this, because what we all want to believe is that these parents, every one of them, when their child discloses sexual abuse to them, should instantly go into some sort of, I don't even know what it is. I think we imagine that they would say, that happened, he's out of here, you're with me, everything's good, I'm calling the police, you'll be fine. Now, I have seen that happen. There have been a couple of times I've seen that happen. There are times. But I try to imagine this for myself, having been married for, 43 years. I think if someone told me that my husband abused my grandchild, what would my first thought be? I would think, well, my first thought was, that can't be right. I know him. How could that be? And that doesn't mean that I would not be able to come around to the truth, or very quickly even come around to the truth, or come around to, wow, even if that seems unbelievable to me, I have to protect this child. It doesn't mean that I can't do that. It just means that my first thought is not going to be, oh yeah, I knew that. Because that would be really hard for me to believe. So I try to put myself in that place with the first thing out of their mouth might be, that can't be. Or what? What did you say? Is that true? Sometimes that's what they say. And I hear moms a lot, within a few days or a week say, I can't believe I said that to her. I said, are you telling me the truth? And they feel guilty about that. And I also don't want to lie to you. I'm not lying to you. We have seen the worst. We have seen the worst of the worst. We've seen mothers who don't believe, don't protect, and do not deserve to have their children, and their children are removed. I've testified in family court on behalf of a child whose mother really did not have the capability to take care of that child. So I'm not here saying that I'm not like Pollyanna, like I think children should never be removed. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we need to, I hope everyone can listen with that kind of discerning ear when a very common reaction of denial is the first thing that comes to their heads, and give them a chance, which I think mostly happens. But I know I've heard some kind of bad stories about parents being very shamed for not reacting in the way that the system that we think they should. They fear loss of privacy. They think everyone's going to know everything about everything in their family. You know, it's going to be all out there, because a lot of times people spread all kinds of gossip and rumors, and they fear that the system is going to put their names are going to be in the paper. They feel guilty. Most parents feel very guilty. They feel like, how could this have happened? And I didn't know it. They feel betrayed, because it's usually someone they care about or someone who they've trusted. They fear violence, if it's a domestic violence, or the person may be violent otherwise. And if that person's found out, are they going to retaliate because we've made a report? They feel helpless. Guilt and self-blame. Sexual inadequacy. This is one where sometimes parents, the non-offending caregiver, will think that if I had been a better sexual partner, they wouldn't have turned to a child or to my child. And I think what the research bears out that most of these offenders are having sex with their adult partners and they're molesting children. There are those that are fixated, or whatever the word is that Tom's using these days about those that don't have sex with adults too, but most of them have sex with anybody, including children. Anger, they feel angry at the person. We don't need someone making threats to go out and kill them and all that. That happens a lot. The dads in particular are going to want to go out and kill somebody and as you heard, I think Dr. Sims said earlier, they're going to be, and I always tell them, you'll be the one in jail before he's ever in jail. So don't do it. Let the system work and hurt. The number one predictor of success in healing from the sexual abuse is the support of the non-offending parent. So it is in our interest as a system to work as hard as we can unless the parent cannot do it. Some of them can't, but any parent who can, with the support of the system, take care of their child, that's going to be the best thing for that child. And it's going to take a lot of work in some cases. So working with parents is key. It's similar to the grief process. So a parent who's losing a partner, now we know there's a lot of them that are losing a partner that they haven't had very long, right? But there are some, we've seen some pretty sad ones where, kind of like what I just described, I've been married for 43 years, where a grandfather has abused one of the grandchildren. And that whole family has a grief process that is unbelievable. I don't happen to believe that was probably the only victim. I just think they haven't come forward in all those years. But so that partner of the offender has a lot of grieving to do. The child needs a calm protector, so we need to help that non-offending parent or parents be as calm as possible. Overreactions on the part of parents can really foster the child's feeling that it's something wrong with them. And when children hear well-meaning people talk about threatening to physically harm. That is scary to them, and it's frightening, and that makes them feel responsible for it. And that's what the things that recantation comes about, the whole chaotic thing. People are screaming, people are, threatening, making all kinds of things. A child thinks, oh, I wish I could just take that back. I don't really like what's happening here. So, I've talked a little bit about this already, but I did want to mention that I think our view of mothers in these situations is very blaming and detrimental to many children. Do you think, am I off base on that, or do you think that's true? You agree? Well, and those are difficult, those are all the difficult kind of things that happen when these cases come up. Because one of the alternative hypotheses, often when we're talking about a stepdad or a divorce situation or a custody, is that they don't like their stepdad, or they don't want to visit their dad, or something like that. But if children disclose that something sexually inappropriate has happened, and the mom doesn't agree, or if they don't agree to, in the term of the investigation, or that period of time, if they aren't going to agree to keep the children away from the alleged offender, then I think DHS is in a tough spot. I think they have to take them. Am I right? I mean, they have to, and I understand what you're saying. So I'm talking about, I guess I fall on the side of when there's been alleged a sexual assault or sexual abuse of children. What I'm talking about is moms who, I think mothers do have to do what the system asks them to do to keep their children safe, and let the system do its investigation, or however the process was that it did all turn out. I think we can avoid the removal. The adults need to take the responsibility for separating, or they need to have the supervised, or the visitation somewhere else. It isn't easy. It's not easy. I don't think the risk of children being sexually abused, having the offender that has been disclosed in the home, is worth the risk. So I will say that. It does. I understand when you've got, yep. So what we would like to see on the part of workers, even when they have to do tough things, is that they can say, boy, this is a really tough case, and it sounds like, and I really feel, I'm sorry that we have to, that there seems to be a lot of, inconsistent and difficult things here, but until we get it straightened out, I really need you to be okay with him staying somewhere else for a while. Are you going to be able to do that? And I'm sorry that's happening to you. But in fact, we do that all the time. But when there's investigations, because hardly ever do these cases they're never that simple and cut and dry. And yeah. But so my point in blaming mothers is kind of what I was saying earlier. If they don't have that immediate, they do have to immediately protect. So they do have to be able to immediately say, all right, until we figure this out, we will keep the children separate from the offender. You have to. I'm not a person who thinks that you can, I don't believe that. But what I see sometimes is, did she know? And here's the thing. What the parents I've worked with, many parents I've worked with over the years, they mostly do not know. There's some that do. Most of them absolutely do not know this has been going on. What they do in counseling, or even sometimes pretty quickly, they sort of reflect on what they're hearing, and then they start to, in hindsight, recognize, oh my gosh, that happened, And then they start blaming themselves. I should have been more vigilant. I should have paid attention. I didn't listen when she said I didn't want to go there. When she said this was going on. So what we know is that in my work, that these moms that are immediately saying, I can't believe this, I'm shocked, I don't know. That's not non-support. That's immediate crisis, that's immediate shock. And I've had some that were pretty non-supportive to begin with, and DHS has allowed, she said, okay, I'll keep them safe. She kicks them out, and she comes to counseling for a while, and she gets it. She gets it. But sometimes some of them take a little longer, and they take some support. And I think those kids, I've seen some really wonderful success stories with kids that their moms finally came around, I guess. Some of them have some sympathy for the offender that's really hard to take sometimes. And then he's done a number on them as well. The children should never suffer at the expense because of that. The children should not. But those women often need an opportunity to let that sink in, to hear the reality, be educated about what this means, and figure it out. And I think they're sometimes judged very harshly, very quickly. So I just worry about that. Most mothers I've worked with, they love their children, they want to protect them. I've worked with a few that I think love their children, they just aren't able to protect them. They just can't do it. That's really sad. And if we can provide some assistance, it would be helpful. So just a few things about maintaining a respectful, non-judgmental attitude with parents. It's tough. Some of them give you reason to judge them. They have a lot going on in their homes. They have all kinds of other stuff you don't like. You don't like that you've had a history with them from before. But most parents do not want their children to be victims of sexual abuse and are very devastated by it. Even those who have not been as, some of us might judge them. They haven't been Parent of the Year. That doesn't mean they don't love their kids, and it doesn't mean that they want their kids to be harmed. I think it's really a good idea if you can. Here's where if you have a hard time with, because of all of the case history you have and all the things they've done wrong in the past, and everything they've been in jail or they've done who knows, all the things that they're in trouble with the law and CPS for. If you can look at what's their strength, can you find a strength? One of the strengths that we find is that they've called, even though they haven't been the best example all the time. They've been in trouble with you already. They called the police when their child disclosed this. Even though they, loved the offender, they still called the police. They kicked him out. They said, no, he's not here anymore. I said, you're out of here. I've heard this. And I've heard him say, I don't know if she's telling the truth or not, but he's out of here. I don't know, because we can't. I've heard him say it. So what's the strength? They are able to set a boundary. So you have to sometimes really, you might really have to hunt for it. You brought your child for medical care. You're bringing your child for counseling. You came for the forensic interview. We didn't have to hunt you down. Sometimes we have to hunt them down. So find their strength. I can tell you care about your child. I don't know what it is. What are some other strengths you all have seen in parents that you could point out in a time of crisis like that? I know you have to do that. When you go over to some of these homes, the homes you go into, and people are really struggling to make it so that they can maintain their family, you give them credit where you can, don't you? Is it hard? You get discouraged? I've had some really tough moms. I was once in my office, I don't have as many on my caseload now, but I was once the one that got all the difficult moms. You know, the one that had to say, I said to her, you know what, I'm really, really sorry about everything that's happened to you. I feel terrible that you had a childhood the way you did, because she's pouring out her stuff, because nobody listens to her ever, or ever has. And I tell her how sorry I am that that's happened. And I know, and there's help for you here, and we can help you. But what's really the most important thing right now, today, is the safety of your child. So we can deal with all the rest of that stuff later. And I hear you, and I hear that you need help, and that you're wounded, and that this happened to you, and all that. But this is what we have to do today. So I'm glad you brought her today, and all that, you know. So that's, you know, you can kind of give them the tough news, but still understand if you can bring them along, it's going to be better for that kid to be with their non-offending parent if that parent can be helped to protect them. Absolutely. Parents wonder. That's the other thing. This is a different thing. This is a different thing than getting beat up in the schoolyard, or I don't know. The sexual assault of a child. Will my kid ever be okay? Is their life ruined? Will they be able to have children? Will they ever be able to have a relationship? Parents they're freaked out about this. If it's a boy who's been assaulted by a male, they wonder if their child will be gay. So there's a lot of information for these parents and a lot of support to help them understand that their children can, because they believe them and they bring them and we help them, their children can have productive, good lives. Thank you for bringing them, because that's what they need. They need you to believe them, and they need the system to support them, and some sort of accountability for the offender, which does not always mean criminal justice. As a matter of fact, it hardly ever does. But some sort of accountability, like you can't be around my kids anymore, or maybe family court, something. I will say, just on this point, after all the years I've been doing this work, one of the things that's been happening recently, so this is a very interesting thing that's happened to me and a couple of other of the counselors who work with me. We are now getting calls from adults coming back for counseling that we saw when they were children. So they came in as 8, 9 years old, 7, 8, 9, younger, a little older. They came to us. They had a forensic interview at our CAC. They had counseling with us. We went to court with them. Their offenders went to prison. Guess what's happening now? Offenders are coming out of prison, and they're grown up. And they're freaked out. They're scared. They're triggered. So what I wanted to do with my flip chart here is just talk about the thing about sexual abuse in the long term, for the long term. And we teach this all the time. I often tell parents all the time, and you might tell parents this too. When you have children who are sexually abused, I want you to take them to counseling now. You get them all hooked up. They go to counseling, and when it's time, or when they're done with counseling or court or whatever, they get to go be a kid again. Yay, that's the goal, right? They get to have a life, a normal life. They told, the system responded, the abuser, whatever, is away from them. They had some counseling, they went to court, they get to go back and be kids. And then people think, well, then maybe it's over. And now I always say, but it's a process, the healing, and it's not going to happen just like that. And when they get to a different developmental stage, they may need to talk about this again when they understand what it means from a context of being an adult. So, this is a circle. Those of you over there that can't see it, on the sides, whoops, I just wrote on there. So, this is your whole life, say, okay? And it's a pie. So, it's a big old licorice pie because it's black. All right. So, when the sexual assault happens and the sexual abuse occurs, or the crisis of it, so the crisis of telling, maybe. I'm not sure how this is for a child that it's going on over and over, but their whole life sort of is consumed, a sexual assault victim, by the sexual assault. And if they're a child who's had ongoing sexual abuse, it's just their whole life. And then for whatever reason, it stops. And the point then would be to shrink it to just an event in their life or a part of their life, but not their whole life. So now it's just a piece of their life. And depending on how often it happened or how severe the abuse was, or this will have a different size of the piece of their life depending on the significance of the abuse. If it just happened once, they're one of those kids that happened once and it might just be like a little sliver. But I think for most kids, if you can shrink it down so that it's not their whole life, but it's a piece of their life, they're not going to forget it. It's not going away. It's not like it didn't happen. It's always there. But just like in the grief process, so I like to ask you, if you've had a loss in your life, at first it's the whole thing. Your whole life just feels like that feeling of grief. And then as time goes on, you begin to heal. It becomes a piece of your life. You don't forget the person that died or the loss that you had. And once in a while, it gets triggered up and it comes back and you might think about the person, whatever, anniversaries, whatever. So we don't deny it happened. We don't pretend that the person didn't live or anything like that. But it doesn't consume us the way it did during the crisis of the abuse or the crisis of the death or the loss. Does that make sense? So this trigger right here, boom, it can be just as big as it was when they told the first time. They see the offender out in the community. All that stuff when they were a little kid floods back to them. And they're calling up, and I'm still there 20 years later, 10 or 12 or 15 years later. Can I come back and talk? So this abuse really, really carries with a person through their whole life. And we need to be, it is different than some other things. And I think it's really important that we recognize that and do everything we can as a system and a coordinated response to keep those families together, to keep that child with the parent who wants to learn how to protect them and herself. We're getting near the end. It's a long day on the same topic, right? Co-occurring domestic and sexual violence. Again, and here's a topic. Domestic violence victims are very often perceived as not protecting their children from the batterer in the home. And this is a really important thing. You all do you hear the news every day, right? You hear about the domestic homicides every day. We had one in Calhoun County that just about killed us. It didn't kill us, it killed them. A sheriff, deputy, killed his wife, killed himself, and his children found him. gruesome scene. The police in our community are devastated. Domestic homicide is a reality every day. And so when women who are in those relationships are scared to leave, and we know that's not the best situation for their children. I mean, we do know that, absolutely. But they really need help in getting out of that and being able to keep those children with that non-offending parent, if at all possible. Taking those children out from their mom is, I think sometimes it probably has to be done, and I'm not going to judge when those situations are, because I can't. But I think that we blame those women very often for staying, and we know that when they leave, they are at extreme risk for being murdered. They fear being murdered, then their children stay with him. They often kill the children too. Sometimes they kill the children just to get back at her. She knows what is best for her most often. She knows who she's living with and what that means. So I just want to say that because I think sometimes we can blame, why didn't you get out of there? Why didn't you? And I think they want to, and they try to, and they want their children to be okay, and they want their children to be safe with them. And we need to be really careful and work with our community partners on how to best serve these women. And I think removing their children is probably not often the best answer. You may disagree. Any comments or questions on that? So I think it's a tough one. I mean, I've heard in some counties, I don't know, I don't think it's true in Calhoun. I've heard in some counties it's an automatic. If they get called to a DV, they take the kids. Am I right about that? I mean, I think I've heard that around the state.
Just a domestic violence situation?
If they don't get away from the batterer.
In that situation or in the future?
I think that I've heard that there's a lot of children who are removed because they've witnessed the violence in the home. Yeah. I don't have the answers to it. I just think that I think there's a lot more to learn. I hope that you'll all look at David Mandel's model. I know they're coming to Kalamazoo. He's coming to the Y, correct? There's a lot. It's very complex, and there are a lot of different scenarios that, again, there are scenarios that I would not, I'm not making a blanket statement on anything like that, because there are scenarios for domestic violence and where I think children absolutely are not safe. And I understand the dilemma you're in, the risk that you put. And I did put down here that when the batterer is also a child sex offender, I don't think there's any such thing as trying to, for me, reunify that family. But he needs to be out of the picture. But I think that the safe and together principles, I think, are more about how can we get him out of there and have them, the children and the mother, be together safely. Is that correct? And him, I think that was I had a brief training on it, and that we want to not have them removed from both parents unnecessarily. I think there's some blanket statements, and maybe it's case by case. There are some counties where I know it's just, this is the policy, 1, 2, 3, I would agree that we have a lot of work to do on learning how to nuance these on a case by case basis, I think. I think blanket policies can often be harmful to children. And I agree, we don't want to take the children, like what I said to that mom who was, having a difficult time with the sexual abuse of her child, but really feeling more, worrying more about her own needs at the moment. And I validated that she had a lot of needs, but that right now the priority was the child. And I think that the Safe and Together model does foster that, recognizing that the support, underlying support, is needed. And I don't think, CPS workers and foster workers on their own can do that, and law enforcement. But I think we have to work together to see that most of these children are going to do best, the sexual assault victims, if they can be with their non-offending parent. And sometimes that parent's living with a batterer, and we do hear that in our forensic interviews. We hear it quite often. The mom is saying that, and then we're trying to hook her up with services and get her help. But we know it's a struggle, and she's scared, and I don't know what we can do except continue to educate and learn. And I think this model, the Safe and Together, I think it's a great step for us to have more empathy and understanding for women in those situations. Yes. Thank you. And here's the co-occurring domestic and sexual violence Safe Together model principles are right here in the slide. And that is, it's flipping, holding accountability of the offender, not making the victim of domestic violence the person accountable for what he has done. We want to hold him accountable. And focus on her strengths as well. And it is an intervention, and it is a support system, and that is very well said. Thank you. The patterns of the coercive control on the part of the DV offenders put children at high risk if their mothers try to leave. And I said that already. And domestic violence victims will often display the counterintuitive behaviors to try to protect their children. So they might not call because they're afraid of retaliation by the batterer, or they're afraid that the system's going to remove their children. I'm just going to say a couple things about adult survivors who are non-offending parents of child survivors. I said this a little bit already, but a lot of times when you're working with child victims, we hear this all the time. I hear it in counseling, we hear it at our interviews, we hear it at our SANE exams. The non-offending parent who brings the child in will disclose their own childhood sexual assault. I bet you all have heard that. And they'll say that this has happened to them also. And sometimes they've never told anyone before. And so there's a big continuum of responses by these survivors when their children are abused. And at one end of that continuum is that they are incredibly devastated. They become hypervigilant, overprotective. They are just in shock and devastated, and they say, this happened to me, I swore this would never happen to my child. On the other end of the continuum are some who are sort of, well, she'll get through it. It happened to me, she'll be okay. They just sort of accept it as a part of, this is what happens to people. So we kind of have everything in between. And the support, again, of the system in not seeing that the one end of the continuum of somebody who has normalized this as a part of trauma in everyone's life, that we don't judge her to be non-protective or that she can't be protective. She may well be able to. They need counseling, and they need in-home counseling a lot of times, types of support. The intergenerational is similar to this. I'm sure you've all seen these kind of cases. We've had them. Mom comes in with a child that her own perpetrator abused. So we have a grandfather who's abused his daughter and his grandchild. The victim, the mother of the little child, says, I didn't think he would ever touch another child. Now that doesn't make a lot of sense to us, does it? He's a sex offender, he abused you, why would you put your children around? That's the question. That's the question that gets asked by system people all the time in a pretty judging manner, and I'd say even harsh manner a lot of times. And here's what I know about the survivor. They think it's about them. That mom thinks that the abuse occurred to her because it's something about her. He picked her. He did it to her. There's something wrong with her. She believes that about herself because she has not probably told people about her abuse or done anything about it. And she really, in her mind, thinks he would never hurt my child. Now that's a bad one, and that's a hard one, and CPS has a really hard time with that one, and they do take the kids sometimes. Yes. Somebody raise a hand? No? What I'm going to say is that I've worked with moms like that too. And while that is, I would say, the system views that, and I can't say I totally disagree, as a pretty egregious mistake. Those parents often, when they can have some of their own counseling and understand about offender behavior and that it wasn't about her, it's about him and what he does, those parents often can be able to keep their child safe. But usually CPS has a pretty strict plan about that for a while, and I think that's appropriate. And in our county, we've seen them work with those moms pretty well, and not just automatically give up on them. Have other people had different experiences with that? I know we've seen that work. We've seen that work in some cases, and when a mom will understand, and is devastated and just couldn't believe it. And last, I'm going to just say sex trafficking of children. You've probably been seeing it. I think we see it on a large scale, like we've seen some pretty big operations in our region where people are trafficking images of children, and they're transporting children from one county to another directly. They're also doing a lot of trafficking of pornography, abusing the child in real time, video, selling it, sending it out. We're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing that on the, like I said, the kind of the larger scale. You see big cases, and then you just see anyone can do that with their phone. So it could be one person and a few kids. It can be a few, a bigger organization. How are you all seeing some of that with the child sexual abuse? Yes. We see a lot of social media predatory stuff, adults posing as other kids, picking kids up, taking them across county and state lines, doing all kinds of other kinds of activities. So there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of runaways, on the streets, the kids that are out who are kind of, I think, escaping a lot of abuse in their homes, who are out on the street, and there's these, people that refuge take them in, provide them with alcohol, drugs, are having sex with them, but also prostituting them. So we see a lot of that. That's unfortunately all going on. Young kids, little kids with mostly a lot of the video using kids to produce pornography has been shocking to us, what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of it, so I'm imagining if we're seeing it in Battle Creek, Michigan, you're seeing it in every county, Michigan. And I was asked just to pull together a couple of ideas about best practice. There are a lot of best practices. We strongly advocate the CAC model. How many people in here have CAC in their county, the Child Advocacy Center? So a few people know. So the Children's Advocacy Center, I think, has made a huge difference in our helping children who are sexually abused all over the state. It's the model that uses a very coordinated multidisciplinary team process for the forensic interviews of children. And the interviews are typically done by a staff interviewer at the center. However, if we need backup or help, the CPS workers will step in and do that. We work in conjunction with them and the law enforcement and an assistant prosecutor. And then that team assesses, what does this child need? What does this child and family need? What are the supports? So in-home counseling, do they need wraparound? Do they need a medical evaluation? We send them now, and actually I will say, Dr. Sims is up in DeVos. We have at Bronson Children's Hospital Dr. Sarah Brown, who used to be at DeVos, but she's now the person doing our medical evaluation since Dr. Gushurst, whom she mentioned, has retired. So we do have a really good specialist for that medical. And we have SANES who do the acute medical all throughout the region. This is a strength, that's a model that really values that multidisciplinary team, and that's the part of it that I think the coordinated response that we can broaden to more disciplines. We can emulate that in communities that don't have CACs. Working together is the most critical piece because we hold each other accountable. What's happening with this case? Where did the investigation go? Is that child in counseling? What did we find out? How's the court process going? How is that foster placement going? You know, where is the child? And I think it works quite well. And we've all sat around our table in Calhoun County. We have a monthly case review meeting and reviewed a case and looked at each other and acknowledged that our team failed that kid. That's not an easy thing to do. More often we like to say we've done, and more often we do well for a kid and for a family. But there have been a couple of times when there's been something that's fallen through the cracks. And we all together own that. It's not just one entity. And we say, what could we do better next time? How are we going to fix that? Because we can do better than this for the kids in our county. Trauma-informed therapy models for counselors. So one of the things that an accredited child advocacy center requires is that we use trauma-trained therapists, and we also refer to those who have trauma training. So we have a lot of that in our community, and if you have any questions about that, you can contact me and I can help you with some models. There's an online trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy course that you could take. Wraparound community services are really important. In-home therapy, safe housing. Specialized medical treatment, as we talked about already. We have the West Michigan Children's Trauma and Assessment Center at Western Michigan University. You saw Dr. Jim Henry on the video speaking. He's pretty amazing in his work. And a highly trained multidisciplinary community team, and that's what I just spoke to, the value of that. And I think that's what we just need to continue doing. I have references as resources here, but I did want to add a couple more. The National Children's Alliance, just look them up regarding CAC model, and they have a lot of resources for you there. And also, just on the neurobiology of trauma, that I think they were referencing on the video. I also think that if you Google Rebecca Campbell, Dr. Rebecca Campbell from Michigan State University, she has a wonderful webinar that's just, I think you can link to. There's a link on there. And she does the best job ever of explaining that neurobiology of trauma. And I think it's a really critical piece of our understanding when we're trying to understand victims of domestic violence who are moms to sexually abused children, or moms who seem to be struggling with numerous levels of past trauma in their own lives. I think it will help us have empathy and be able to facilitate some better interventions and wraparound support and community response to do the very best we can for our kids who deserve it. They deserve to be safe, they deserve to be healed.